Hi, I'm John Salisbury. How's everybody doing today? Excellent. Thank you so much for coming to this event. We were so excited to kind of come up with the idea for this concept of having a cool interactive event that has a drone race right in the middle of it. And we're just excited to see the turnout. So really thank you so much for coming. This talk is going to be about business case for smart cities. And we have some expert panelists that are available, that are going to be speaking on each topic. And I'm going to go ahead and start the introduction. So I'm John Salisbury with SmartLink, and I'll be moderating. And we have with us
John Putnam with PowerNet.
Calvin Cooper. I'm a director on NCT Ventures investment team. We're a venture capital firm based in Columbus.
Cool.
I'm Steve Wimsett. I'm with Ruckus Wireless.
And I'm Terry Holmes with CNX.
Wonderful. So what we're going to start off talking about is the biggest opportunities that you see for businesses in smart cities when it comes to your business background.
We've been involved in smart cities for several years now, and we're seeing a change in the dynamics in terms of the ability to monetize that solution. So several years ago, we would go to a prospective client, and the conversation revolved around, give me a couple $100,000 and I'll light your area up. And the prospect would say, I don't have that money. Where am I going to get that money? So in the last couple of years, the technology has evolved and matured to the point that now we can put some monetization in place that says, not only will you give me a couple $100,000, but let me show you the ROI, let me show you the payback, let me show you the community changes that we can implement and sustain this and grow this and make this happen without you having to spend the money up front and not get any return for it.
And so we've been focused on the smart city space for several months now. And while we've been investing in technology companies for the past decade, we just started to dive in on the smart city sector following the City of Columbus winning the U.S. Department of Transportation Smart Cities Challenge, beating out 78 other cities and winning a $50 million in grants from the U.S. Department of Transportation, Vulcan Inc. And the City of Columbus, the business community came together and made over $500 million in commitments to smart city efforts. So as a firm investing in the region, we asked ourselves, is this an opportunity for entrepreneurs to succeed? And would they be interested in coming to Columbus and bringing solutions that we could invest in? And it turns out that they were. So we partnered with Singularity University, American Electric Power, to launch the Smart Cities Accelerator. And at the start of the launch, when we put out the applications, we did a pretty big deep dive to research what was going on in the market. So to get to the question about what are some of the things we're seeing, this early stage venture perspective on smart cities is newer. We're seeing that there are just starting to be active accelerators and dedicated venture firms investing in smart city solutions, and there's starting to be large corporations like Cisco, AT&T, and others who are engaging ecosystems of startups.
Where specifically are you seeing them? Like what vertical in the smart city? Like are you seeing them in transportation dollars and connectivity? What are you seeing the most focus?
So there's a lot going on in transportation, but there's a lot going on in every sub-vertical that we identify. And there's so many. It's such a buzzword right now. But you've got waste and water management, energy efficiency, telecommunications. You've got big data solutions. But to kind of simplify, how we're seeing this, you've got the infrastructure. You've got sensors that sit on top of that infrastructure, and then early stage companies that are starting to make use of that data and develop specific use cases that are valuable.
And that's fundable. You're seeing companies come up and getting funding opportunities.
That are starting to emerge, yes.
Fantastic.
Okay, I'm with Ruckus Wireless. We're an edge infrastructure vendor, so we sell Wi-Fi, fixed switching, and we also now support IoT backhauls such as BLE, Zigbee, and LoRa. So I'm going to answer the question in terms of where are the opportunities. I think it varies based on the type of city or really the size of city you're going after. If it's a large city, they've really sort of followed they've seen what happened in New York City, where the city did a public-private partnership with Link New York City, which is ultimately a Google-backed entity. Google is paying to put in these kiosks all over town. They're replacing every public payphone with a 12-foot tall internet kiosk with double-sided 55-inch LED screens. And they're actually putting that in for free. They're delivering free public Wi-Fi, free phone calls anywhere in the U.S. They've got a tablet there for browsing. And they're going to return $500 million to the city over 10 years. That's a contractual guarantee. So if you're a big city, or if you're a business selling to a big city, public-private partnerships are quite popular these days. Boston, Seattle, Atlanta, even I think Cincinnati did an RFP. I don't know whatever happened with it, but Cincinnati, I think, did an RFP saying, we'll let you put broadband in, or we'll let you deploy fiber on our streets, but in return, we want you to put in free Wi-Fi. So these public-private partnerships, it's a trade. In New York City, they're allowing someone to put in billboards, sell advertising, in return for offering these services to the public as well as the revenue stream. In Cincinnati, it was access or preferred access to deploy fiber, and we see that a lot. So that's sort of for large city opportunities, and those are challenging opportunities to win because cities are complicated places. It's a 2 to 3 year sales cycle, and there's a lot of people who will do things for free to get in there. Where we probably see more activity is with small and mid-sized communities, where they realistically, they're not going to do a PPP. They don't, there's not that many large companies battling who want to pay for the privilege of deploying something into those communities. So smaller communities have more specific needs. Either they're trying to build up the image of the town. They want to be viewed as a high-tech town, so they need to put in some IoT solutions, some public Wi-Fi, do something to attract visitors, retain businesses, things like that. A lot of small towns, and this is actually in parts of large towns as well, they're working on digital divide issues. So you have, because of the E-rate program, schools across the U.S. have great Wi-Fi indoors, and they're handing out laptops to kids who wouldn't otherwise be able to afford them. So we've got these one-to-one laptop programs. They're instituting a digital curriculum. But if those kids go home and they don't have access to the internet, and some of the speakers earlier today have mentioned this, they're in trouble. They can't even do their homework. I mean, they're already from a lower income background. Fewer than, I think the stats say 46% of low income households in the U.S. do not have broadband at home. So for giving them all broadband at school and putting all their homework online, cities everywhere say this is something they really need to solve. But that's another instance. Smaller towns, they see smart city as infrastructure. It's something that they have to invest in like any other infrastructure. So I'd say the best opportunities for a business trying to go into this is have some sort of a package. Put in a networking component, maybe some IoT solutions, maybe some IP video security. Small cities want the same thing as big cities want, but they're willing to buy a prepackaged solution. It just has to be easier to buy. And I think they're going to be deploying a lot more of this faster than a lot of the big cities.
Our company, CNX, our primary mission is to monetize government assets. And by that, cities have utility poles, street lights, traffic signals. All of those are cost centers today for the city. We go in and try to monetize those and make it a profit center for the city. So we'll work with cities, counties, and states and develop a long-term broadband strategy on what they need to do to transition to be a smart city, and part of that is monetizing their assets. As an example, the city of Columbus up the street here has a 700-mile fiber network owned by the city with just a ton of excess capacity. So we are their agent to go out and lease that excess capacity on that fiber network. We work with cities to come up with long-term broadband plans that would include both wired and wireless. A smart city is a connected city. And today, cities are connected by incumbent providers, the cable provider, the phone provider. We work very closely with a group called Macquarie Capital out of Australia. And here you would know them as Kentucky Wired. And they're building a 3,200-mile middle-mile fiber network across the state and hooking up every state agency, every state office, every university with 1 to 10 gig service. And that's underway right now. You asked about the Cincinnati RFP. We worked with Macquarie to send in a proposal on that Cincinnati, well, it was an RFQ actually, and we are named as a finalist. There's 5 finalists in that, waiting for the next step, which will be the RFP process. Our proposal for the city of Cincinnati was to build a fiber network, a last mile network, to every premise, every home, every business, and every municipal asset, those utility poles, street lights, traffic lights, so that they could truly become a connected city. Every resident would get a basic level of internet service. So you solve the digital divide. Every resident. And it would be a basic level, maybe 5 by 5, 5 meg up, 5 meg down. And then the network, even though it's owned by the city, it's built and operated, maintained, and even refreshed by the best of breed companies. People like now in Kentucky Wired here, we have Fujitsu, Black & Veatch are some of the teams, Leadcore, Bolin. So best of breed companies come in and design it, build it, operate it, maintain it. And then the network is open for open access. So other carriers now have access to all those homes and businesses to develop and serve or distribute applications we can't even think about today, because the general public never had access to those networks. We're doing the same thing in middle miles. We've proposed them in other states, other counties, and other cities, and many were finalists and waiting to win some of those awards. But it's all premised on a public-private partnership. So the governmental entity, whether it's a city, a county, or a state, would own the network, but it's operated by a private enterprise.
Good explanations, guys. So, what we talk about connectivity as a base layer, right? And a lot of us in this conversation have talked about connecting to, 100% connected, 100% mobility, 100% resilient is sort of the Venture Smarter mantra. The question I have is once you get 100% connected, what's that next goal we're striving for from an opportunity standpoint?
So a good way to think about it is like the App Store, right? So once you have a device in everybody's pocket and it's a smartphone and there's a way to download apps at scale, then the entrepreneurial community will create different businesses around specific use cases. So similarly in the smart city space, if you have 100% connectivity and you've got a limited bandwidth, you think, next you've got smart lamps, right, with sensors that collect data. They collect data that measures air quality and that senses sound, and there's cameras everywhere. And then, as an early stage investor, we think about now what's possible now that wasn't possible in the world before that. And so we're just setting up systems to source those ideas from entrepreneurs.
Makes sense.
I agree with you that the connectivity is the foundation. That's what's required first and foremost in order to layer on top all these additional benefits that can be derived from that connectivity. So we look at it in the project that we've done in Avondale at the stakeholders that that can layer in and add value to that connectivity. So as we talked about bridging the digital divide, Cincinnati Public Schools kids have the ability to continue their education and connect to the internet. The medical community is highly interested in this technology because now they can reach out to a targeted segment with a message that's pertinent to them. So you can look at it and say a message to a 21-year-old single head of household female can be delivered messages about prenatal, postnatal, child rearing. The 72-year-old in that same complex can be delivered a message about, hey, it's that time of year, you should be getting your flu shot. So instead of a broad billboard-based message that you're hoping to hit a general target with, now we can be very specific with the delivery of that information. And then we look to other stakeholders that will have the ability, we'll talk about job training. So what we found is the number one use of our free Wi-Fi in these projects is education. Number two is job search. So how do we notify people of job availability? How do we provide job training? Many times in these disadvantaged neighborhoods, people don't have the ability to leave their apartments because they have child supervision responsibilities. Now we can deliver training on a digital format. So we look at all those stakeholders that we can layer in on top of that foundation to not only monetize it and expand it, but also to add value to it and improve the community.
Well, I'll second what these two gentlemen just said. If you build it, uses will come. I mean, we see it over and over again. If you put out a high-speed network or high-quality network, the demand goes up. People show up on that network. They use it a lot. I guess the one thing that I would say from a smart city perspective that's probably different, that's a change from just a continuation of just more and more bandwidth, is with smart cities, all of a sudden we have a whole alphabet soup of different wireless protocols. So it's not just a question of, gee, I've got fiber to the home, that's all the bandwidth I'll ever need, I'm done. Now with smart city, with some of these IoT capabilities, you want to put sensors on a bridge, maybe, make sure that the bridge isn't shaking too much. There's no power there, there's no backhaul, so you're going to have to put a battery-powered sensor. Doesn't have to send much data, but it's got to work for about 10 years because no one's going to want to climb out there and replace the battery every 3 months. So I would say, what comes next after you've got fiber or broadband everywhere? I think you're going to continue to see evolution in what are the wireless options, what are the technology options that are going to become more and more fine-tuned for different business cases, and that's going to open the door to new things.
One specific use case. So you mentioned that nobody's going to want to go out and change the battery on that sensor. One company that we identified in the Smart City Accelerator, Nikola Labs, has a chip that's smaller than a fingernail that takes ambient energy from Wi-Fi networks and replaces the need for a battery for use cases like that. So you'll see just innovations like that hit the market. It's a little early because a lot of these sensor networks haven't been deployed, but there's going to be incredible things that come to the forefront in the next couple of years.
I think there's going to be innovation on the sensor side, on the device side, as well as the network side. But you already see very large-scale LoRa networks, Sigfox, BLE, Zigbee. All these things are taking place already. So cities need to plan for a multi-protocol world. And how do they manage all that easily, securely, and provide a platform so that the entrepreneurs out there can try all these new IoT things?
Clearly, to be a smart city, it's going to take connectivity, both wired and wireless. The struggle today is the ubiquity of those networks. The incumbent operators aren't going to go in and spend billions of dollars in the less advantaged neighborhoods or the very rural areas. And it's going to take a government-type program through the Macquarie P3 program to get that ubiquity. That's the only way it's going to happen.
I beg to disagree. I think that's the model that we had to battle in the past, but I think that there's change coming in terms of our ability to monetize and generate revenue like you've done in other places, but do it off the same backbone and bring these stakeholders in that will allow us to get a reasonable ROI on an investment in delivering that infrastructure in place through some of the companies that you see coming up and some of the stakeholders that we've seen, that I think that in the future that model will change. And I'm hopeful that it will change.
Yeah, the problem with the incumbent model is access to the network, the open access. You need to foster competition to drive down prices and drive up services and applications.
So how do you, so we're talking about things that are, in my opinion, that are somewhat quantifiable. So we lay fiber and we get a return on investment, right? And we open up access, there's competition because there's demand for that pipe, right? What about delivering a service that's needed to be a smart city that doesn't have a high demand or need from a monetary standpoint? So there's lots of use cases. I'm going to come up with just one, for instance, right? Elderly care, in home. There's not really a demand for payment for it because people can't afford it, right? But it might be an application that might need to be done, to have a smart city, work. How do we help those two people?
I actually think there is demand for that, and there's a pretty clear revenue stream because we're spending a fortune taking care of the elderly, and we're all getting older every day. There's a wave of us who are very concerned about this topic. Hopefully not right away, but I think there's all sorts of solutions. You can put a bracelet on someone now. You know when they fall. You can tell if they haven't moved from one room to the next. You can set variance alarms. You can tell if they've opened their medicine bottles. I think there's a lot of things you can do, even now in private residences.
And I believe that those development of Internet of Things devices is going to assist in that. So, I mean, if you look at, all the smart technology in terms of movement, the refrigerator, something as simple as have they opened the refrigerator, have they eaten today, all of those things are going to play into, as a fellow baby boomer, the ability to stay at home longer, hold off assisted living and those high-cost alternatives as long as possible, that could ultimately be a financial savings as versus some of those high-cost alternatives of assisted living and then ultimately some sort of extended care.
We actually made a healthcare IT investment specifically in this space of home healthcare. And so, an investment thesis at the time, I'm on the board. It's Karen Alex, shameless plug.
Awesome.
But 10 years ago, mobile devices weren't as ubiquitous as they are now. And so, a home healthcare agency, it would be very cost prohibitive to replace paperwork with iPads or iPhones, right? But that's no longer the case. We're in a bring your own device workforce now. And so agencies have the opportunity to have an app that powers their agency and collects all the data from was the caregiver there on time, where they said they would be when they were supposed to be there, and did they do the tasks that they were supposed to do, and then automatically submit that information to the payer. So that creates greater efficiency and ROI there. So there's a lot of instances of specific use cases that are now available because of connectivity.
And the data that will generate will be invaluable to the pharmacy companies in terms of designing care, to the doctors in terms of delivering better care. So one of the things that we look at is we generate a lot of data off the smart city is engaging the education community to crunch through that data and look for things that they can do in terms of improving the quality of care, the delivery of care, the medicines that are required, the dosage required, all of those things that can play into delivering a better quality of life for those people, and crunching through the data to make sure that you improve that over time.
So once this is fully deployed, then that becomes possible.
Absolutely. But you got to have the foundation, then you got to have the application, and then you have the data and the ability to crunch through it and generate revenue off of that data, but also deliver better care because of that data.
I'll just give you one other example, going back to your original question, if I recall it correctly. But what about use cases where there's not much demand or there's not a business case? Let's just go to the digital divide. Now, I already talked about it. This is a big problem, but there's things you can do to make this work. First of all, if I go back to E-rate, all the schools in this country are getting funded to have a very fat Ethernet pipe to the school. They're getting brand new indoor wired and wireless networks. They have great capability there. Today, it's a smart rule, I think. I understand why they did it, but E-rate has restrictions in it where the school cannot send that bandwidth across the school boundaries. The issue is they don't want the schools to become competitive service providers. But if there were a way where the schools were allowed to take that bandwidth, take the network that they've already got that's fully paid for, and just share that, say within a radius of a mile or two of the school. Someone did a study, it might have been the World Bank, I've got it on my laptop, but something like 95% of the households in the U.S. that do not have broadband access are within 2 miles of an elementary school. So if we get some regulatory changes where schools who have a critical need to share that bandwidth with their kids when they go home can just put in a point-to-point wireless bridge, there's a lot of really low-cost ways to do it, then you could make that, you close the gap in the business case so more people could serve the digital divide. Another model is what John has done, or what you're looking at doing, I think with the Cincinnati School District, where you're deploying, in low-income housing units, they're not deploying broadband to every unit, they're deploying, we call it bulk Wi-Fi. So just put a couple of APs in the hallway, you can serve 4 or 5 units per access point. Your deployment costs, your operating costs are way lower. Actually, I did the math. You're doing that, you're serving that community at a cost of about $12.50 per apartment per month. And $12 is the price point that's been identified as, that's where you need to offer broadband services to serve the next billion people in the world who can't afford broadband today. So John's managed to bridge that gap already.
So the smart city, we talked about all the technology things. The most important thing to me are the humans, right? And all of that is to serve the people. And if we're not improving the quality of life, that's, all these connectivity things are obviously going to do that, right? So one of the things I wanted to focus on today is how do you think you can make the experience for someone who's living in a city better, in a smart city, and how can you make a business case for that?
One of our goals is to connect communities, and we've accomplished that in Avondale, and one of our initial concerns was how will that internet access delivered into a disadvantaged community be used? We were very excited to see that all of our surveys have shown that the #1 use of free Wi-Fi in the disadvantaged community is for education. #2 is for job search. #3 is when we get into the social media and entertainment aspects. So if you throw it up and provide it for free, they'll use it for things that improve the community. And then on the other side, we're looking at how do we improve the community using that foundation for those medical purposes, job training purposes, connectivity to all of the things that you and I take for granted, having high-speed internet at home and at the office, and being able to change and affect change within those communities and break those cycles. So one of the projects we're working on right now with American Heart Association is in disadvantaged communities, there is food insecurities because there are no good quality sources of food within these disadvantaged neighborhoods. So they also don't have the tools in which to cook and prepare healthy meals, so they end up eating junk food all the time. So we're working with American Heart Association to train the kids in the Cincinnati Public Schools, to train the kids on better eating, a private public-private partnership to deliver crock pots to the community so that they have the tools to cook food, and then engaging that community to let them know when healthy food is available at the local food pantries so that they can get healthier food, prepare the food, and have the recipes to deliver it, so we have a positive outcome of eating better, hopefully being more healthy, and then changing that medical outcome.
I gotta clap for that.
I'm just the guy who sits up here. There are a lot of smart people back at PowerNet that do all of this stuff and put all this stuff in place. I'm just the one that comes up here and delivers the message. There are a lot of great people that are involved in making that process work well within the Avondale community.
Yeah, something that one of you said earlier about jobs. There are companies out there now that do job interviews, and you sit in front of your laptop, in front of your camera, and they interview you live through your own internet connection. I have a niece that did this, but if she lived a mile further down the road, she couldn't have done that without going somewhere to a library or somebody else's house, because she had no connectivity. That's why we've got to have ubiquity.
I would just say, in terms of, you know, how does this improve people's lives? I mean, there's lots of use cases. Parking. You know, when you drive downtown, someone did a study and they said 30% of traffic is from people circling for parking. I don't think I fully believe that number, but people circle around a lot, and when you're doing it, it's very irritating. But if you went into town and there are signs saying, here's you know, turn right up here and there's 5 parking spaces, and I know they have parking lots back in San Jose that are equipped with this. It's beautiful. You just keep going up the ramp until you say, oh, there's some green lights here, I'll go park. From a like a healthcare perspective, I think someone around here did it. They put these LoRa sensors on asthma inhalers, and they're able to tell whenever people use their inhaler. And in about 2 weeks, they could find out that everyone was using their inhalers when they walked along a certain stretch of the road. So, okay, well, there you go. We've got this whole city, but now we know it's like these 4 blocks are the worst place in the city for air pollution. They did something like they planted trees, and it was like next to a highway. Maybe it was predictable, but they could document it, and they knew that's exactly where the problem is. So there's all sorts of things. There's cities using, you know, well, I'll get that's bad.
No, keep
business
going.
case.
That's not a business case, but all this. Well, I think the point we had there was that we've all come up with creative ways to help people, and when you're helping people, there usually is a business case around that. It's kind of what I want to get to, right? So the other thing I want to get to is like some of the challenges, and I don't want to get into this like baby food style, right? Give me some nuts and bolts of challenges that are real, that are specific to you, and that a city could do to make it easier for you to move forward with smart city services in their city.
Sales cycles are way too long. if it's a priority, you
second
gotta pay
that.
for it, right? And so there's a lot of cities have solved for specific problems, and then going from one city to the next takes a lot of time. And specifically, one use case is a technology company that worked with the city of Detroit to reduce excessive use of force by police officers, and ultimately reduce the millions of dollars in payouts that officers had, or that resulted from those cases. They did it using data. They just benchmarked, had KPIs, could identify trends in behavior, and then just recommend remediation. And that worked. And so scaling that to the next city just takes a lot of time. It's not as quick as working in the private sector.
And I agree 100%. What we find is, and one of the speakers earlier today hit on it, is that you have risk adversity in many of these communities, and nobody wants to be the first guy to buy anything. So we spend an inordinate amount of time in that sales process convincing people that we can deliver the solutions. And in many cases, we're taking solutions that we have developed and are successful with in the commercial side of our business and trying to deploy them in just a different environment in doing smart cities. But there's this reluctance to be the first one. Nobody wants to be the first one. They all want to be number 2 and number 3. So many of the battles we have is convincing people to be the first one to implement this technology, even though we've got it proven out in many other places. So I would encourage you to, when you have the opportunity to push people to try innovation, do proof of concepts, embrace this change and embrace this new technology.
So just quickly, and I know I'm moderating, but I just wanted to interject real quick, I apologize, is I see this being a different perspective depending on which part of the country you're in. So if I go to Southern Florida and I said, this is the first to market, their eyes light up, they get excited, and they say, how fast can we go? If I bring that same solution to the Midwest, it's a totally different perspective. If I go to the East Coast, it's different. If I go to the West Coast, it's different. So, maybe speak to that too when you're talking about scalability side. I'm usually seeing first movers being adopted more in the South and on the West Coast than I am on the East Coast and the Midwest.
I just need to change my venue then.
I was actually gonna attack it a little bit differently. I was gonna say, look, these applications are just getting started. We do know that there's real benefits. And I think that's creating confusion right now, because every day, you open up what is a GovTech magazine or whatever, wherever you get your information about smart cities, and you read new success stories, new wins, and a lot of times they're pilots, but there's all these new technologies coming out there, and cities don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to, bet the farm on the wrong thing. But what I would say is, universally, you're going to need some communications infrastructure. You're going to need a way to connect all these applications. And also universally, you're going to have to manage your data. I think if you get into what really is a smart city, it's probably not the Wi-Fi. It's probably where you go and you rationalize the data across all the silos, the police department and transportation and waste management. And that's just a heavy lift. That's a long process for even a small town. But you're going to have to do that eventually, and the data's not going to change. So that money is not going to be wasted. Your foundational infrastructure isn't going to be wasted. But I would say, focus on putting the building blocks in place, and as you get those, and maybe have a couple of short-term, quick-hit, early win projects. But once you've got the communications infrastructure in place, your ability to innovate, your ability to do proofs of concept, you can run through those very, very quickly, and you're just going to learn much more rapidly. So you don't have to bet the farm on just one application or one solution. But you're going to need communications. You're going to have to rationalize the data. Maybe start there and pick off some wins to get the support of senior management.
I agree that the sales cycles are extremely long, and a lot of it comes from a lack of political will or having a champion within the city who has that vision and isn't afraid to act on it. One of the other problems we see, and really, as far as where it is in the country, I don't see where it makes a difference in what we do anyway. And we have more success in the Midwest than we do on either coast.
Wow.
Columbus is, the nation's smart city, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe, yeah.
I think that's changing. I think you're right. Cities like Columbus have changed significantly over the past few years.
But it does take a champion to push anything with smart cities. And smart cities is quite the buzzword in cities and has been really the last year or two. It's really picked up. But I don't know that they really know what a smart city is. A lot of folks just don't understand what it takes to become a smart city. And it's everything connected. And that lack of political will, today cities are managed by people, but tomorrow's cities are going to be managed by data. And people are afraid to go there. So it's going to take some time.
So they say every problem has a solution, right? And every solution is an opportunity, right? So problems theoretically are opportunities. So do you think the problems that you just discussed are potential opportunities to solve?
Yes.
and if so, how do you think that's where people should be focusing on?
I think And we see that as an opportunity. I mean, there aren't many VCs investing along the smart cities theme.
Yes.
Right? And so seeing that the tides are turning and that the infrastructure is being put into place, that many cities are starting to have the political will, that the business community is starting to lean in, that's an opportunity.
Cool, I agree. I saw in the problems that you stated, I saw many opportunities, specifically in the data realm, existing. So those are strong. And one of the other pieces is the smart city framework. So a couple years ago, when I was in my conference room, and Zach used to come in. Well, he still does every Saturday and Sunday. We work together, and we work on this framework that we've just been working on our own. And it was all about standardizing processes so you could get scalable, repeatable between cities and have a less uncertainty to speed up the sales cycle. So the whole genesis for us doing that 2 years ago and where it's gotten today has all been around those very specific things that you guys spoke about. So that was pretty cool to hear. So I wanted to close out with, I like to do something simple at the end. Is what does a smart city mean to you personally?
Oh, you would first last time, but you're going to give me that one?
I could do it. So it's that we significantly improve the standard of living in our communities, but also that when we look up at the skyline, the logos have changed. I don't want to just have smart cities be a movement, that our cities deploy a lot of capital and infrastructure, but that we don't also engage entrepreneurs to build businesses in our communities.
I agree. I think it means different things in different communities. In an affluent community, it can mean driving redevelopment back into a downtown area and changing the demographics of what that downtown looks like. So if you take a small community that wants to try to bring people back to the heart, the traditional retail on the first floor, housing on floors 2 through 6, Wi-Fi is a way to drive that retail and bring people back down into the city center and revitalize a city center. In disadvantaged communities, there's such a great opportunity to affect change. How do you break those cycles that have been there for generations and generations and generations? And having a smart city and getting that information out there and showing people a different way of doing things can affect change at a much greater rate and a way that we could never even imagine years ago.
Okay, repeat that one more time so we can all remember. I'm just kidding.
No, you gotta write this stuff down.
I would write that.
I would say that the measure of a smart city is one that has implemented some dramatic changes to the services they provide, the way they deliver those services, or how they use their assets. And I think the characteristics would simply be a city that, someone mentioned political will. I think that's at the top of the list. But also a city that has an infrastructure in place and some processes in place where they're able to rapidly try and roll out new things. I think the technology is there. I think the expectations from the citizens are there. I think the business case is pretty much there, but cities have to go out and make that happen. And I think the cities that do, you're going to know who they are pretty quickly. They're going to break away from other cities.
Well, in its purest technical form, a smart city is a connected city that drives efficiencies and responsiveness. A successful smart city is driven by its citizens.
Yeah, that's pretty much the definition, I guess, on the internet at least. To me, I would say it's more about a city that has the ability to learn from its mistakes. So that's huge for me. And that usually means that it has a memory, it has data, and it's learning from that, using that data to make better decisions, and that it has a goal of enhancing the quality of lives and promoting upward mobility. And that's the big things for me personally. But it definitely has different unique perspectives from every individual. Some people say cars that drive themselves, it makes a city smart. And that's usually when you get into the philosophical discussions for now until that becomes reality. So last question, I'm going to go. Cars are coming that are autonomous, to kind of segue into that. So when they do, what do you believe, how are cities going to be what are they going to have to do to prepare themselves for it, and where are they going to have to do that at?
I'm a car guy. I will never let a car drive me. It's just not going to happen. I'm a dinosaur. I race. I am a car guy. So I am going to I want to qualify my answer by saying that ahead of time. I think it changes everything. From a productivity standpoint, that time that you normally spend commuting is now spent working. I think it changes all your traffic patterns and your traffic flows. I mean, you have to think about how cities are laid out now and how they've been laid out for the last 100 years. All of that's going to change because they lay it out because stupid humans can't drive. Now, as you add that intelligence to that ability to drive, you can re-engineer your cities and traffic flows and everything else and improve all of those things. But there will still be that dinosaur like myself that creates those problems that create all the horrible traffic jams.
I'm like you. I've got a 6-speed convertible. I live in Colorado, and I love to drive in the mountains. And I don't want my car to drive me. But what it's going to take a series of sensors all along all the roads. It's going to take the smart parking sensors to tell you where to park or tell your car where to park. But eventually you'll get in a car, plug in your destination, drink your coffee, read your newspaper, and it'll take you there. The sensors will do all the predictive analysis to tell you if there's an accident ahead, reroute you, and get you as close to your destination as possible, or drop you off and go park somewhere in a remote lot. That's where it's headed.
Yeah, I guess from a more tactical perspective, both DSRC and cellular V2X technologies are being developed and being deployed by mostly right now the focus is with the major car manufacturers and the mobile operators. But there's a couple of solutions available that today it's mostly vehicle to vehicle that they're focused on. That's where it's going to get rolled out first. But there will be a play for cities, and I think this is going to be a critical block for any of you doing Vision Zero initiatives, where you can now tap into this car-to-car communication.
Could you name those protocols just one more time, just to make sure everybody hears them?
DSRC it's been around for like 15 years. It's the vehicle-to-vehicle protocol. It's like 5.9 gigahertz. And it's dedicated short-range or direct short-range communications. No one's done anything with it for the first 14 years, which makes sense because there weren't autonomous vehicles. It would have been a waste of time. Now all of a sudden it's sprung to life, and there's an alternative technology, runs in the same spectrum, but this one's more backed by the mobile operators, which does both the vehicle-to-vehicle as well as vehicle-to-network, vehicle-to-infrastructure, and vehicle-to-pedestrian. I think as these, all of a sudden there's been a rush of work in these wireless protocols, which I think will be the critical building block to enabling these autonomous vehicles. But again, cities will have a play. If you put in the roadside infrastructure, you're going to be in a better position to support autonomous vehicles than a city that hasn't. So there's another business model question.
And what these gentlemen alluded to was just that the cultural aspect of it. I'm contrary, have a contrarian view here. I think we've got more time than a lot of people say we do before there's full deployment. You'll probably see deployments in controlled environments like mining, right? And then specific routes like bus routes and things like that. But fully autonomous vehicles on the roads and replacing human drivers, we've got a lot of cultural barriers to get in there. We've got a lot of ethical barriers to get in there as well. We haven't fully solved, how we're going to program those algorithms to make decisions like, real life decisions. Do you save the life of the driver or do you save the life, of the people around you? And that's going to take some time.
Steve and I had a conversation earlier today where we talked about that phased implementation of the autonomous vehicle and how you look towards California and commuter lanes and how that might be one of the early adoptions of the autonomous vehicle and how you would just like you have to have two people in the car in order to take advantage of the commuter lane, is you would have a autonomous vehicle lane that would be the first adoption of that first wave of that technology. You would get in that lane, hit the button, and then it would take over until you got to the exit point that you wanted to get off. So we agree that it's going to be one of those use case basis, and the commuter lane was our first idea of where that use may be, and I do agree with you in terms of mining and some of those industrial applications as well.
So the car life thing, I like to answer that question with a simple, that we actually are putting this in our framework, 100% stamped in gold. All human life by technology will be treated equally, and if a technology has to make a decision about which life to save, it tries to save all lives equally at all times. So there's never a decision between one or the other. So that's going to be stamped in our framework. And you can.
There is a decision. There absolutely is. And if you decide not to do something, that's also a decision, right?
But it's a decision. You would basically try to save both. Is the assumption there?
There are edge cases where that's not gonna
Trust me, I've went through this for, like, Elon Musk likes to say he has hot tub talk. I have like my conference room talk, which is I guess equivalent to his hot tub talk. But not
nearly as cool.
Not really as cool, because like the simulation stuff, we don't get into that too often. But you can go through a lot of the situations, and really when you think back to it, it actually gets back into the 1950s, 1960s sci-fi writers like the Ray Bradburys and all these guys who, like Isaac Asimov, who created the 3 laws, and you kind of get into those things. A lot of those guys actually put a lot of thought into like a lot of the things we're starting to think about now, actually practical execution. So if you were a big reader of those, you can kind of have that as mindsets. But when you do go through those simulations, you actually think through it, and it actually turns out that if you make that simple statement that you will try to save all lives at all times and treat all lives equally, that actually is pretty compelling in the data that you get, surprisingly.
Yeah. Love to chat more about that.
But I believe we digress.
Well, we digress. Anybody has a final statement?
Any questions?
Questions from the audience. We got 4 minutes. Questions from the audience. Okay, go ahead, Jamie. How am I? I'm great. Appreciate that. How are you? Good. Excellent. All right, sounds good. Shout out to Rob Scott, Mike Grogan, good peeps, and Mr. Zach Hune enjoyed the entire talk, so that was pretty impressive to watch. Thanks, everybody, and thank you so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the day. Check out some drones crashing. It's going to be an awesome rest of the day. See you guys.